They were only hours away from renewing a 50-year exclusive contract between Matrix Infrastructure National Logistics Backbone and Hale Global Freight Aggressive Shipping Empire. The location was a meeting room on the top floor of the Matrix Tower in Manhattan. I was there early, specifically on the floor, behind the chairman's desk, in a dark hoodie, reconnecting a gateway node tied to 15 East Coast ports. No one introduced me, no nameplate, no title. Just the girl in tech crawling under executive furniture. That was intentional. The founder had asked me to stay invisible. We were evaluating Hale before signing away half a century of access to our routing architecture. You don't test a partner by asking questions. You test them by removing their spotlight. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening right now, and what time is it, if you believe that justice will prevail no matter how difficult the circumstances? Please consider subscribing to and sharing this channel, because every time you do, you're helping stories like this reach people who might need a reminder. And now I will continue the story from that room. Richard Hale walked in like applause, followed him everywhere. Custom suit, crystal scotch, the confidence of a man who believed contracts meant ownership. His eyes landed on me. Is maintenance allowed in executive space now? A few restrained smiles around the table. No corrections. He strode to the central dashboard live freight routing across the Northeast Corridor and hovered his finger over manual route override. A vanity move. A dangerous one. I stood and stepped between him and the screen. Sir, that override reroutes live cargo without compliance buffering. You'll trigger a cascade failure. His expression hardened. You're blocking me. Do you know who I am? I met his eyes evenly. Yes. That's why I'm stopping you. The slap came fast, loud enough to echo off glass and steel. Know your place. He turned to the chairman. If she's employed by the end of this meeting, we reconsider the renewal. No one defended me. My cheek burned. I didn't react. Instead, I glanced at the dashboard. A red notification blinked at the corner of the screen. IP system integrity, compromised reportable event logged. He thought he had humiliated a technician. He had just triggered something far more expensive. What you just witnessed was only the spark. The next part of this story blends dramatized elements and AI-assisted storytelling to sharpen the message and deepen the emotional experience. If it resonates with you, that means more than you know. And if it doesn't, I genuinely hope your evening is calm, your thoughts are light, and you get the rest you deserve. Before Richard Hale ever raised his hand to me, I had already spent years protecting his company from itself. I was the architect behind the routing system that manages 28% of Northeast logistics traffic. I designed the toll payment API that processes millions of transactions every day without a glitch. I built the compliance layer that shielded Hale Global Freight from federal penalties during 2 separate audits. When regulators demanded documentation, my system delivered it in minutes. Hale, meanwhile, had a different pattern. He threatened to withdraw capital to pressure us into lowering licensing fees. He flirted with compliance boundaries, treating them like suggestions instead of rules. He concealed data discrepancies until my team quietly corrected them to prevent public exposure. I absorbed those risks so the partnership could survive. Now, standing in that rooftop boardroom, he held up the renewal agreement like a sacred artifact. 50 years, he declared, tapping the folder. $4.2 billion. We own this infrastructure. The chairman said nothing. Silence can be agreement, or it can be calculation. I remained in character, still the anonymous tech in a hoodie, hands folded, face neutral. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him who built the foundation he was claiming. Instead, I sent a discreet internal message from my phone. Trigger legal review under Clause 12.4. Seconds later, my screen vibrated. IP violation qualifies for immediate exclusivity suspension. For the first time that morning, the contract he worshipped stopped looking permanent. Power doesn't always rise with volume. Sometimes it stands up quietly. Richard Hale recovered from the legal alert faster than I expected. He pointed toward the door without even looking at me. Security! He snapped. Remove her! I don't want this woman in the building. His tone wasn't angry anymore. It was dismissive, the kind reserved for people he believed were disposable, for a moment. No one moved. Then the door opened. 2 members of security stepped in, followed by Daniel Brooks, our chief legal officer. Hale exhaled, clearly satisfied. He assumed they were there to carry out his order. They weren't looking at him. They were looking at me. Daniel stopped a few feet away and spoke evenly. Madam Executive Chair, the board is ready. The air changed. You could feel it shift. Every head in the room turned toward me at once. Hale's expression stalled, somewhere between confusion and irritation. I stood slowly. The hoodie that had made me invisible now felt theatrical. One of the security officers handed me a tailored blazer. I slipped it on, smoothing the sleeves, letting the silence stretch just long enough. I apologize for the misunderstanding, Daniel continued, addressing the room. Ms. Vaughn has been conducting a partner integrity evaluation under the founder's directive. I met Hale's eyes. I am the founder-appointed executive chair of Systems Strategy, I said calmly. I've been reviewing your operational conduct. His face drained of color. That's not possible, he muttered. Your IT. I built the system you're licensed to use. I walked to the central console and placed my hand on the biometric panel. The screen recognized me instantly. Activate Protocol 0, I said. Target Hale Global Freight. Suspend Diamond Access. The command required dual authentication. Daniel confirmed it without hesitation. Hale stepped forward. You can't just, yes. I interrupted gently. I can. On the dashboard, the contract status updated in real time, exclusive to under immediate suspension. For the first time that morning, Richard Hale wasn't the most powerful person in the room. I was. If you're still here, ready for what comes next, leave a 1 in the comments because your voice matters more than you think, and every perspective strengthens this conversation. I lowered myself into the chairman's seat, the leather still warm from earlier tension, the skyline reflected behind the glass. But inside the room, every eye was fixed on the central dashboard. I folded my hands calmly and said, let's measure 10 minutes. Protocol 0 executed in layers, not theatrics. Minute 1, the routing license assigned to Hale Global Freight was formally revoked under compliance suspension. Their access token expired across our distributed infrastructure. On the screen, their priority routing status dimmed from blue to gray, somewhere across the northeast corridor. Nearly 10,000 Hale trucks switched automatically from optimized routing to manual mode. Drivers wouldn't understand why their navigation suddenly defaulted to generic mapping. They would just see delays. By minute 3, fuel optimization algorithms stopped communicating with Hale's fleet management servers. Without predictive burn calculations, their real-time fuel cost projections began to spike. Margins shrink faster than pride recovers. Hale had stopped pretending to be amused. He pulled out his phone and called his CFO. It's temporary, he insisted. Pacing. They're running a test. Minute 4 arrived quietly. The toll autopay API we licensed to them lost authentication privileges. Without system validation, transactions began flagging as unverified. Automated payment lanes across multiple states shifted Hale vehicles into review status. The room felt smaller. This is a breach of contract, Hale barked. No, I replied evenly. It's a suspension under contract. His CFO must have said something alarming, because Hale's tone changed. How much exposure he demanded. I didn't need to guess. At minute 6, Daniel's tablet chimed. He angled it slightly toward me. NASDAQ alert. Hale Global Freight stock had dropped 8% in under 6 minutes. No press release, no scandal headline, just market reaction to instability. Hale stared at the screen, color draining from his face. The system wasn't crashing, it was responding, and we were only halfway through 10 minutes. Panic doesn't arrive all at once, it spreads in percentages. 35% of Hale's active deliveries were now flagged as delayed, without our optimization layer. Their fleet was bleeding time at every interchange and port entry. Dispatch managers across 3 states were refreshing their screens, watching red indicators multiply. Hale's phone was still pressed to his ear. "Recalculate!" He snapped at someone on the other end. "Shift volume west!" He spoke like the system would obey him out of habit. Minute 7 proved otherwise. A notification flashed across the shared display, an automated compliance alert from a major Amazon regional hub. Service level agreement violation, risk threshold approaching. The message was clinical, almost polite. In logistics, politeness is expensive. Hale stared at it as if it were a personal insult. "That's a bluff," he muttered. "It's math," I replied. By minute 8, the deeper fracture hit. Our toll payment authentication server officially terminated Hale's IP-linked license token. Without that digital handshake, their automated payment system locked into restricted status. Vehicles began routing to manual payment lanes. Manual means slower. Slower means backlog. Backlog means headlines. Hale finally lost composure. "You can't do this. I have a 50-year deal." I held his gaze. "You had a conditional license." The distinction mattered. Ownership was his illusion. Access was our authority. Minute 10 arrived without drama. Just numbers. Daniel's tablet refreshed again. Hale global freight stock was down 42%. Market confidence had evaporated faster than Hale's certainty. Hale lunged toward the console, as if proximity could restore power. Security stepped forward, not aggressively, just decisively. Then his phone vibrated again. He answered, listened, and went still. The emergency board meeting had been called. He wasn't invited, for the first time since he walked into that room. Richard Hale understood what exclusion felt like. Richard Hale recovered just enough to posture. "This is bad faith," he said, jabbing a finger toward me. "We'll sue Matrix into the ground. You can't weaponize infrastructure." His voice carried the brittle confidence of someone who still believed volume could reverse math. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. Daniel stepped forward with the composure of a man who had already read the ending. "Mr. Hale," he began evenly, "Matrix is exercising a contractual right." He placed a tablet on the table and turned it toward the room. First, the security footage, clear, time-stamped, the moment Hale struck me and knocked over registered equipment. Second, the incident report documenting physical damage to protected intellectual property, specifically the gateway node tied to licensed routing infrastructure. Third, Clause 12.4 of the renewal agreement, intellectual asset harm. Immediate suspension rights. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence favored us. "You provoked this," Hale snapped. "You set me up." "No," Daniel replied calmly. "You triggered a clause." Outside that room, the consequences were already compounding. News of instability had reached analysts within minutes. Regulatory attention followed volatility. By early afternoon, the Securities and Exchange Commission opened a preliminary inquiry into Hale Global Freight's disclosure practices. When stock drops exceed certain thresholds without clear public explanation, questions are mandatory. Hale's phone rang again. He answered. His expression hardened. One of his primary banking partners had frozen a portion of Hale's revolving credit line pending risk assessment. Not terminated, frozen. In finance, that distinction is a warning shot. He turned back to me. "Reinstate the license," he demanded. "We can negotiate." "There's nothing to negotiate," I said. "Suspension stands pending compliance review." Minutes later, another alert surfaced, this time not from regulators or banks. A major institutional investor announced the withdrawal of $230 million in exposure to Hale Global Freight. Citing governance concerns, the number didn't need commentary. Hale lowered his phone slowly. For the first time, he wasn't arguing. He was calculating damage. His counterattack hadn't failed because we were aggressive. It failed because it had no foundation, and foundations matter. By the next morning, the security footage had leaked, not from us, not officially, but once something is uploaded, It no longer belongs to anyone. The video was short, brutally clear. Richard Hale striking me in a Manhattan boardroom and demanding my termination. No context softened it. No editing reframed it. It was simply him, within hours. It was everywhere. Hale responded the only way he knew how, by going louder. He appeared on financial news networks claiming corporate sabotage and accusing Matrix of orchestrating a coordinated attack on his company's valuation. He framed himself as a victim of internal politics and regulatory overreach. I watched the interview from my office, noting the tremor he couldn't suppress in his hand. The market didn't buy it. Analysts replayed the footage alongside his statements. Governance questions multiplied. Commentators discussed executive temperament, fiduciary duty, and material risk exposure. When arrogance becomes public record, sympathy evaporates. Then came the shareholders. Several institutional investors released statements expressing serious concerns regarding leadership conduct. Proxy advisors recommended immediate oversight review. Hale's credibility wasn't eroding quietly, it was dissolving under scrutiny. By midweek, Hale Global Freight's board convened an emergency session. This time, I wasn't present. I didn't need to be. The vote passed with a supermajority. Richard Hale was temporarily removed from operational control pending investigation. The language was corporate, almost polite. The meaning was not. He called me that evening. "You wanted this." He said. "No." I replied evenly. "You triggered this. Public humiliation is different from private loss. Private loss can be denied. Public humiliation lives in headlines. But the collapse wasn't finished. The following morning, Matrix issued a brief press statement. We announced the opening of a structured bidding process to acquire Hale Global Freight's distressed assets, citing strategic expansion opportunities within Northeast logistics. It wasn't hostile. It was efficient. For the first time since he walked into that rooftop boardroom, Richard Hale wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to survive, and survival rarely looks dignified. Richard Hale requested a private meeting 2 days after his temporary removal. Not at his office, not in a boardroom. He came to mine. No cameras, no audience, just glass walls and silence. He looked older than he had on the rooftop. The confidence was still there, but it had narrowed, sharpened into something closer to urgency. "I'll triple the contract value," he said without preamble. 75 years, increased licensing, full public apology, whatever you need. He leaned forward, hands flat on my desk. "You win. Just reinstate access." There it was, the transactional reflex. In his world, every problem could be priced. I studied him for a moment before answering. "Respect isn't billable." His jaw tightened. "This isn't about respect. It's business." "It is business," I said calmly. "And business is built on enforceable structure. Outside that office, the numbers were still falling. Hale Global Freight stock had dropped 53% since the suspension. Analysts were downgrading outlook projections. Suppliers were tightening payment windows. Banks were reassessing risk exposure daily. He wasn't negotiating from power anymore. He was negotiating from erosion. "You're destroying thousands of jobs," he said, shifting tactics. "No," I replied evenly. "I'm enforcing a contract you violated." Silence stretched between us. For the first time. He didn't have a counter. He finally asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" I didn't answer directly. Instead, I slid a folder across the desk. Matrix Infrastructure had formally initiated a structured acquisition proposal for Hale Global Freight's distressed assets. It wasn't hostile. It was procedural, a stabilization plan wrapped in legal language. His eyes scanned the summary page. "This can't be serious." "It is." The offer was simple. Matrix would acquire Hale Global Freight for $1, assume operational control, restructure governance, and preserve supply chain continuity under new leadership. He looked up at me slowly. $1, yes. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it arrives as a number so small it feels insulting. And for the first time, Richard Hale understood exactly how that felt. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it signs paperwork. 3 days after our $1 proposal, Hale Global Freight's board reconvened. Their stock had not recovered. Credit remained restricted. Key clients were threatening termination clauses. Stability was no longer a strategy. It was a necessity they accepted, not because they trusted us, not because they admired me, but because the alternative was collapse. The acquisition agreement was structured cleanly. Matrix would assume operational control, preserve critical supply routes, and integrate Hale's remaining assets into our infrastructure network. Debt restructuring terms were negotiated in parallel with their primary lenders. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. Richard Hale was not present at the final vote. The board formally removed him from executive authority prior to closing. Governance reform was written directly into the transition documents. Interim oversight committees were dissolved and replaced. Control shifted with signatures, not speeches. When the announcement went public, markets stabilized within hours. Analysts reframed the narrative from corporate implosion to strategic consolidation. Suppliers reopened lines of communication. Employees received internal memos assuring continuity of operations. That afternoon, I walked through what had once been Hale's headquarters. The same hallways where executives had once celebrated aggressive expansion were now quiet, measured, uncertain. I didn't feel triumph. I felt alignment. Matrix integrated Hale's routing systems under our compliance framework within 48 hours. Their fleet regained optimized navigation, but under revised licensing protocols and stricter oversight, infrastructure doesn't punish. It recalibrates. Later that evening, our founder called an extraordinary board session at Matrix. The transition required unified leadership. He didn't speak for long. Effective immediately. I was appointed executive chair of integrated infrastructure strategy across the entire Matrix network. Not interim, not provisional, permanent. The vote passed unanimously, for a moment. I thought back to the rooftop, the hoodie, the silence, the slap. Power had never been absent. It had been observing. Richard Hale once believed ownership came from signatures and volume. In the end, control belonged to structure, restraint, and the willingness to enforce both. $1 had changed hands, but what actually shifted was authority. I sat in the chairman's chair again, this time without a hoodie and without disguise. The skyline outside Matrix Tower looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but the structure beneath it had shifted. Our system's dashboard showed green across the board, routing stability restored, toll authentication revalidated, fuel optimization recalibrated under Matrix oversight. The supply chain was moving again, efficient, compliant, controlled. There were no cheers, no applause, just data flowing the way it was designed to. Hale Global Freight now operated as a subsidiary under revised governance. Contracts were rewritten, oversight mechanisms reinforced, compliance reporting centralized through our infrastructure hub. The chaos of ego had been replaced with architecture. Earlier that day, I watched Richard Hale leave through a side exit of his former headquarters. No cameras this time, no press statements, no dramatic farewell, just a man walking past security who no longer answered to him. I didn't hate him. Hatred is inefficient. What I felt was alignment. The system had corrected itself. When people talk about justice in business, they imagine courtroom victories or public humiliation. In reality, structural justice looks different. It looks like governance clauses being enforced. It looks like market signals responding to risk. It looks like power shifting back to the people who built the foundation. I leaned back in the chair and glanced once more at the stabilized network map. He thought she was ET support. He forgot she built the system. Power is never about volume. It's about structure. What this experience taught me is simple but uncomfortable competence doesn't need applause. And respect cannot be negotiated after it's broken. I built systems that protected millions of transactions and thousands of jobs. Yet in one careless moment, I was reduced to the girl in the hoodie. The lesson wasn't about revenge. It was about knowing your value before someone tries to redefine it for you. In business and in life, contracts matter. Documentation matters. Integrity matters. But so does restraint. If I had reacted emotionally, I would have lost leverage. Instead, I relied on structure. I enforced what already existed. That's the difference between impulse and authority. I want you to think about this if you were standing in that room. Underestimated, dismissed, maybe even humiliated. What would you have done? Would you argue? Would you walk away? Or would you trust the systems you quietly built? And before I end this, tell me, where are you listening from right now? What city? What time zone? What stage of life? If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing, commenting, liking, or sharing. Not for me, for the person who might be doubting their worth tonight. Your engagement helps these stories reach someone who needs a reminder that quiet competence is power. Sometimes the smallest action, like clicking subscribe, can help someone stand a little taller tomorrow. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.